What's going on, everyone? It's Groove Slick, and I've spent the past few seasons on iRacing perfecting the art of driving the Porsche Cup car.
No, come on. Damn it.
Or at least the art of crashing. But with each pass, mistake, and win, I've been learning and adapting my driving style. In this series, I'll be sharing with you all that I've learned, so hopefully you can get to the winning and skip some of the crashing. The Porsche Cup series in iRacing has some of the tightest racing and most skilled drivers. So being competitive requires you to drive this car on the limit and extract every last ounce of performance. But the lack of ABS and traction control make this car very challenging at the limit and especially difficult on the brakes. So maximizing the braking zones can take an incredible amount of time and patience. But I want to help you accelerate this learning curve. So we've been focusing data download on uncovering the secrets of the braking zone. Last time out, we covered initial application, which sets the tone for the braking zone. And in this episode, we will cover trail braking. In my opinion, trail braking is the most essential element to the braking zone. So it allows you to both carry more speed into the apex, but also brake later going into the corner. So improving your trail braking skills will not only unlock a huge amount of speed, but also allow you to make passes and defend your position more easily. As always, we will cover this topic by first understanding the underlying car dynamics and theory behind trail braking. We'll then apply this theory to a corner, this time Piratella at the famed Imola circuit, where we will compare data and onboards to further understand this topic. But before we get started, I want to answer a seemingly basic question. What is trail braking? If we look here at a braking zone, we see the initial application, followed by a period of maximum deceleration. But then we get to the moment when we begin turning the wheel. You can see here that I keep applying the brake past this initial turn-in point. This continuation of the brake zone past turn-in is called trail braking. Now, trail braking serves two primary purposes. The first is to help the car rotate through the corner, and the second and often overlooked aspect is to continue decelerating, meaning the more we trail brake, the more speed we scrub off from turn-in to apex. So now that we understand what we want from trail braking, let's try to understand physically how it works. To do so, let's take a look at the grip on each corner of our Porsche Cup car. As we discussed last time, when we apply the brakes, the grip shifts onto the front tires. And we press the brakes as hard as we can until the tires are just about to lock up. If you missed out on the last episode and you don't find this intuitive, you can learn more about this technique by clicking the link in the top right-hand corner. But we want to understand the dynamics of trail braking, which, as we discussed, is when we continue applying the brakes past turn-in. So, let's bring in a steering wheel and see what happens to the car when we turn it. As you may expect, when we turn the wheel, weight and grip shift to the outside tires. And conversely, the inside tires lose grip. But the act of turning the car actually uses some of the available grip. So, to keep the tires from sliding, we have to reduce the brake input. Therefore, as we turn the wheel more and more towards the apex, we will be applying the brakes less and less. However, to complicate the matter even further, unlike the initial application, our goal here is not simply to maximize deceleration, but to both decelerate and help the car rotate. We achieve this rotation by slightly sliding the rear tires. So, as we turn in, we have to reduce our brake pressure, but also leave it just high enough so that the rear end of the car slides ever so slightly, allowing the car to rotate properly. Doing this correctly requires a great amount of finesse. Too much, and you will lock the rear tires, causing the car to over-rotate and potentially spin. Too little will not only cause an under-rotation, but will also not allow you to decelerate sufficiently. This technique is not only challenging, but also very personal. How much you should trail brake and the car should rotate depends on your driving style. One common way to tune the car to your liking is by adjusting the brake bias, but we'll discuss that more next time. To understand this technique further, let's head over to Imola and take a look at Piratella. It's a fast left-hander that may look straightforward, but is actually slightly off camber, which means the car wants to understeer. So we'll have to use a significant amount of trail braking to help guide the nose towards the apex. At first glance, with full speed replay, both mine and the guest driver's onboards look very similar. It appears that our lines and braking points are almost identical. But once we slow it down, we can begin to spot some subtle differences. And once we take a look at the telemetry, we'll see that these subtle differences actually demonstrate two very different approaches to driving the Porsche Cup car. So we'll start here with my onboard, and this will give us a good sense of what a significant amount of trail braking into Piratella looks like. So we hit the brakes hard just after the 50 board, and then as we get to turn in, I'm going to stop it because we see that I'm turning the wheel, but I haven't really lifted off the brake at all. I'm still applying basically the same pressure. So as I enter the corner, I'm using the brake to rotate the car rather than the steering wheel. And as we get closer to the apex, we can see that I'm still only at about 5 or 10 degrees with the steering wheel, but I'm starting to roll off the brake. So now, as we get towards the apex, I'm applying more wheel, although my brake pressure is still at about 5 or 10%. As we hit the apex, hit the gas hard, track out to corner exit. And that gave us a pretty good sense of what a significant amount of trail braking looks like and how it helps the car rotate. We're turning there with our brake, not with the steering wheel. So we'll look at the guest drivers on board now. And the guest driver does a good job of optimizing the grip and takes a really nice line, the same line that I take, but they just don't use the same amount of trail braking. So they hit the brakes hard, do a good job there, then we get to turn in, and they're almost immediately, they've dropped the brake pressure significantly. And you can see their steering wheel's already turned much more than mine had. This means the car just isn't rotating as much. As we get closer to the apex, they're applying about the same brake pressure I had when I was on the apex. And you can see here the steering wheel is now at almost 45 degrees. So we get towards the apex and that brake pressure is just about gone to zero now, and they're really having to crank the wheel to get the car to turn. But then they hit the gas hard and track out to the exit curb. So that gives you a good idea of how much less the car rotates when you're not trail braking as hard. But to really understand it, let's dive into the data. My data is in the purple, and our guest driver's data is in the yellow. I do want to note that these two sessions were done at different temperatures. Our guest driver session was about 11 degrees cooler Celsius than my session, or about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And that won't change anything too much, just give them slightly more horsepower and a tiny bit more downforce. But generally, it won't change that much. As always, with my videos, the throttle is the bottom trace, brake is the second one, then we have steering and speed on top. And if you're not comfortable with looking at this data and you don't know how to interpret it, I posted a link in the top corner that you can check out, and I just briefly go through what all these squiggly lines mean. I do want to start off with one trace that I haven't mentioned yet. So the line in the middle here is the time difference between me and the guest driver. When this line has a negative slope, it means the guest driver is gaining time, and when it has a positive slope, it means that I am gaining time on the guest driver. And we can see through basically all of the corners, through the braking zone, I gain time on the guest driver. And then through all of the exits, the guest driver gains time on me. To me, this shows how I drive the car harder into the apex, harder into the corner, and kind of sacrifice a bit on the exit. And the guest driver does the opposite, where they drive it a bit easier into the corner, but that allows them to get on the throttle sooner and drive harder out of the corner. So I've zoomed in on our data traces at Piratella now, so we can really pin down the differences in our driving styles and how we trail brake. The first thing I want you to notice is how his and my brake traces look almost identical, except mine has shifted about 15 meters closer to the corner. And if we look at turn-in, which is right about here where we start to bleed off of the brakes, we can see I'm carrying 4.5 meters a second more speed. That's roughly 9 to 10 miles an hour more speed on turn-in. But if we look at the apex, we're both carrying about identical speed. So this shows you how much speed I'm able to bleed off by trail braking more. And what this means is I don't have to bleed off that speed from initial braking point to turn in. So that allows me to brake a good 10 to 15 meters later than the guest driver. This is why I said trail braking helped me so much with racecraft, because if you're braking 10 to 15 meters later than your competition, passing and defending position becomes so much easier. I also want to note that as we saw in the video, we're carrying roughly the same line at the corner. And yet, essentially all of the way into the apex, I'm carrying more speed. This also shows how trail braking is allowing the car to rotate more into the corner and carry more speed all the way into that apex. So not only am I able to brake later initially, I'm able to gain time all the way from turn-in into apex by rolling more speed. So let's look at this time difference. If we look in the top left-hand corner, we see that before either of us lift off the gas and hit the brakes, I'm about 0.39 seconds ahead. As we get to turn-in, that becomes a tenth more to 0.49 seconds. And as we get to the apex, that's 0.55 seconds. So from initial liftoff to apex, I've gained 1/10.5. But as we said before, he gets a better exit, so that gap actually comes down by 7/100ths of a second. That's a nice demonstration of our difference in driving styles, but it also shows how braking deeper into the corner and kind of sacrificing the exit a bit for a better entry and a later brake can gain you almost 1/10 of a second through one corner. So, my first takeaway is keep the pressure high. When people talk about trail braking, they're often referring to the brake pressure they carry on the apex. But as we've seen, trail braking actually starts on corner entry and ends at the apex. And higher brake pressures at turn-in will allow you to rotate more and carry more speed into the corner. So focusing on that is instrumental in improving your trail braking. This leads right into my second takeaway, which is study the steering wheel. Whether you're a beginner or a pro, learning and studying doesn't stop. As we saw with the onboard comparison, the angle of the steering wheel is a great indicator for how much a driver is trail braking and how much the car is rotating on entry. So I find it incredibly important to study other drivers' steering inputs to learn how I can improve my own trail braking. And with the Porsche Esports Super Cup going on, there's some highly talented drivers to learn from. And last but not least is practice, practice, practice. Yes, you can say this about anything, but I think it's especially important with trail braking. Since trail braking is so ingrained in how each of us drives, it can be incredibly challenging to break this habit and change our driving styles. This is a lesson I had to learn myself. When I was starting out with the Cup car, I was so frustrated because I was lacking both speed and consistency. Then it dawned on me that this all stemmed from my inconsistent trail braking. For the next several days, I focused every single lap, every single corner even, on trail braking.
Just remember to trail brake. Remind myself to trail brake.
It was very challenging and at times uncomfortable. Once I broke this habit, my speed and consistency improved massively. So getting comfortable trail braking more takes weeks if not months, but doing so will yield great results. And that's a Group Slick guarantee. Anyways, if you've made it this far, you either enjoy this content or your boss has started forcing you to watch these videos of some sort of cruel punishment. Either way, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this content, you might also enjoy my Porsche Cup live streams, which I do on Wednesday, so keep an eye out for those. And if you want to send me your data to potentially be in one of these videos, I left the details in the description below. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful and helps you get faster. And if this was your boss's punishment, I hope I didn't make it too bad. Anyways, thank you all again. I'll see you on the track.